Commander Vextal sat in his command chair high above the planet, watching numbers dance across his screens. For 3 whole days, the humans on Kepler 442b had refused to give up. Their small colony kept fighting back against his mighty war. Fleet. Most species would have surrendered by now, begging for mercy, but not these stubborn humans. Vextal's 4 arms tapped impatiently on his armrests. His yellow eyes glowed with annoyance as he stared at the planet below. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds, and this tiny human settlement was embarrassing him in front of his crew. The other commanders were probably laughing at him behind his back. "Sir," called his tactical officer, a nervous creature with too many tentacles, "the humans are still holding their defensive positions. Our ground forces cannot break through their barriers." Vextal's mandibles clicked together in frustration. These humans were proving more troublesome than expected. Their weapons were primitive compared to Dominion technology, yet somehow they kept finding ways to push back his soldiers. It was time to end this nonsense once and for all. He stood up slowly, his massive frame casting shadows across the bridge. Every crew member fell silent, knowing what was coming next. Vextal walked to the center of the command deck, his heavy footsteps echoing through the metal corridors. "Prepare the beast for deployment," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The entire bridge crew froze. Several officers exchanged worried glances. Even among the Dominion's most hardened warriors, the beast was spoken of only in whispers. It was their ultimate weapon, their final solution when all else failed. The beast had been created in the deepest laboratories of the Dominion homeworld. Scientists had spent decades perfecting the ultimate predator, combining the most terrifying features from across the galaxy. It stood 12 feet tall on powerful legs that could crush concrete. Its thick, armored hide could deflect even the strongest plasma weapons. The creature's body was built like a living tank, designed to survive anything enemies could throw at it. But the beast's most frightening features were its natural weapons. 6 glowing red eyes provided perfect vision in any environment, able to track multiple targets simultaneously. Each eye burned with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. Its claws were longer than sword blades and sharp enough to slice through titanium like paper. The creature's jaw could snap through steel beams, and its teeth were coated in a natural venom that paralyzed victims within seconds. The beast's tail was perhaps its most deadly feature. The serpentine appendage was covered in razor-sharp barbs that dripped with a toxin so potent that a single scratch meant certain death. The tail could strike faster than most creatures could even see it coming. Most terrifying of all was the beast's roar. The sound was so loud and so perfectly tuned to cause maximum psychological damage that it could literally make other species lose their minds. The sound waves were strong enough to shatter glass and rupture eardrums. Many enemies had simply collapsed from fear upon hearing it, their minds broken before the beast even reached them. The Dominion had used the beast only 47 times in their long history of conquest. Each time, entire civilizations had surrendered immediately after seeing what it could do. Some species had given up just from watching recorded footage of the creature in action. The beast had never failed to break enemy resistance completely. Vextal remembered the last time they had deployed it. The Crystalline Confederacy had been holding out for months, their advanced shields protecting their capital city. But when the beast arrived, their greatest warriors had fled in terror. Their leaders had broadcast their surrender across all frequencies within hours, begging the Dominion to call off their monster. "Sir," his communications officer called out nervously, "are you certain we need to use the beast? Perhaps we could try another orbital bombardment first." Vextal turned his burning gaze toward the officer, who immediately shrank back into his chair. The humans have had their chance to surrender with honor. Now they will learn why the galaxy fears the Dominion. Load the beast into a drop pod and prepare for immediate deployment to their main settlement. The crew jumped into action, though Vextal could sense their unease. Even his own soldiers were afraid of the beast. It was kept in the deepest part of their ship, behind multiple layers of security. Special handlers used advanced technology to control it, and even they never got too close. Minutes later, the massive drop pod was loaded and ready. Through the ship's sensors, Vextal could see the beast inside, pacing back and forth like a caged storm. Its 6 eyes glowed brighter as it sensed that combat was near. The creature's intelligence was frightening. It understood exactly what was about to happen. "Target locked on the human settlement's central square," reported the weapons officer. "The beast will land directly in the middle of their town." Vextal nodded with satisfaction. "Launch immediately, and make sure all recording devices are active. I want every moment of their terror captured and broadcast across all human communication channels. Let this be a warning to any other human colonies that might think of resisting us." The drop pod shot from the ship like a meteor, carrying its monstrous cargo toward the unsuspecting human town of New Haven. Vextal watched the pod's descent on his main screen, already imagining the delicious chaos that would follow. The humans would run screaming through their streets. Their bravest soldiers would throw down their weapons in terror. Their leaders would beg for mercy within minutes. The pod smashed into the town square with tremendous force, sending dirt and debris flying in all directions. Steam rose from the impact crater as the pod's systems automatically opened. Vextal leaned forward in his chair, his eyes wide with anticipation. This was always his favorite part, the moment when his enemies realized they had been defeated. The beast emerged from the smoking crater like a nightmare come to life. Its 6 red eyes swept across the human settlement, taking in every detail. Its massive claws scraped against the ground as it stood to its full height. The creature's tail swished menacingly behind it, dripping with deadly poison. Vextal watched as the first human appeared, a small female child who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She had been playing nearby when the pod crashed, and was now walking toward the crater with curious eyes. This was perfect. The child's terror would be broadcast across the galaxy, showing everyone what happened to those who defied the Dominion. The beast turned its burning gaze toward the approaching child. Its massive form towered over her tiny figure. Its claws gleamed in the sunlight as it prepared to demonstrate why entire civilizations feared its very name. But instead of screaming in terror, instead of running away in panic, the little human girl did something that made Vextal's mandibles drop open in complete shock. She pointed at the most feared weapon in the galaxy, her face lighting up with pure joy, and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Puppy!" Dr. Minji Kim pushed her glasses up her nose as she stared at the strange alien tissue samples under her microscope. The xenobiology lab was quiet, except for the gentle hum of equipment. She had been working for 12 straight hours, trying to understand the biology of the creatures that had been attacking their colony. As the settlement's only scientist specializing in alien life forms, everyone was counting on her to find some weakness they could exploit. The lab windows faced the town square, but Minji was too focused on her work to notice the growing commotion outside. She had samples from 3 different alien species spread across her workstation, each more bizarre than the last. The Dominion forces seemed to enjoy sending different types of creatures to test human defenses, and Minji was determined to understand how they all worked. Suddenly, piercing alarms began blaring throughout the building. Red warning lights flashed on and off, casting eerie shadows across the lab walls. Minji's head snapped up from her microscope as the emergency broadcast system crackled to life. "All civilians report to evacuation stations immediately. This is not a drill. Unknown hostile craft detected. All civilians report to evacuation stations immediately." Minji's heart began racing as she looked out her window. In the distance, she could see people running through the streets, families grabbing their children and heading toward the designated safety zones. But where was Hana? Her 8-year-old daughter had been playing in the park with her friends when Minji started her late-night research session. Panic flooded through her as she pressed her face against the glass, scanning the crowds below. There, she spotted the familiar pink backpack that Hana never went anywhere without. Her daughter was with a group of other children and adults, all moving quickly toward the evacuation center on the far side of town. Minji felt a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. As she watched, a massive object streaked across the sky like a falling star. The thing was clearly artificial, some kind of alien drop pod. It was heading straight for the town center, growing larger and larger as it approached. The impact was tremendous. Even from several blocks away, Minji felt the building shake as the mysterious object crashed into the town square. Dust and debris shot up into the air, and she could hear car alarms going off throughout the neighborhood. Whatever had just landed was big, and it was right in the middle of their settlement. Through the settling dust, Minji watched in horror as something began emerging from the crater. At first, she could only make out a massive dark shape, but as it stood up to its full height, her scientific mind tried to process what she was seeing. The creature was enormous, easily 12 feet tall, with a body that looked like it had been designed specifically for killing. But her scientific observations were interrupted by a sight that made her blood run cold. There, breaking away from the evacuation group, was a small figure in a pink backpack. Hana was running directly toward the crater, her curiosity apparently stronger than her sense of self-preservation. "Hana, no!" Minji screamed, though she knew her daughter couldn't hear her through the thick lab windows. She dropped her samples and ran for the door, her mind racing with terror. What was her daughter thinking? Didn't she understand how dangerous this situation was? But as Minji burst out of the building and ran toward the town square, she stopped dead in her tracks. What she saw defied everything she thought she knew about predator-prey relationships, about survival instincts, about basic common sense. The creature, this nightmare beast that had clearly been designed to strike fear into the hearts of its enemies, was standing perfectly still. Its 6 glowing red eyes were all focused on Hana, who had positioned herself directly in front of it. The creature's massive claws were raised, obviously preparing to strike, and its mouth was open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. But instead of cowering in terror, instead of running away screaming, Hana was doing something that made Minji question her own sanity. "Oh my gosh, you're so fluffy," her daughter squealed with pure delight, reaching up toward the creature as if she wanted to pet it. "Look at those big eyes. You're like a giant puppy. Are you a good boy?" "Yes, you are. Yes, you are." Minji watched in complete disbelief as her daughter began using the same baby talk voice she normally reserved for neighborhood dogs and cats. Hana was completely ignoring the creature's threatening posture, its obvious weapons, its intimidating size. To her, this galactic nightmare was apparently just an oversized pet. The effect on the creature was immediate and bizarre. The beast, because Minji could tell this was clearly some kind of engineered weapon, seemed to freeze in place. Its raised claws trembled slightly, as if it was unsure what to do next. The creature's mouth slowly closed, and instead of the bone-chilling roar Minji was expecting, a sound emerged that could only be described as a confused whimper. High above them, Minji could imagine the alien commanders watching this scene unfold. She could picture them frantically checking their instruments, trying to understand why their ultimate weapon wasn't working as intended. The thought almost made her laugh. Despite the terrifying situation, "What is she doing?" she could imagine them asking each other. "Why isn't the human child showing proper fear responses? Why isn't she running away screaming?" But Minji's moment of dark humor was interrupted when she realized that several other people had noticed what was happening. Instead of continuing toward the evacuation centers, they were stopping to stare at the incredible scene unfolding in the town square. And then, to her complete horror, Minji realized she was pulling out her phone. "Hana, get a little closer," she heard herself calling out, as if this was a perfectly normal photo opportunity. "I need to get both of you in the frame. Your father is never going to believe this." Even as the rational part of her mind screamed that this was dangerous, that she should be grabbing her daughter and running as fast as possible, Minji found herself taking pictures of the encounter. There was something about the creature's confused, almost helpless expression that made it seem less threatening and more, well, cute. The beast's tail, which had been swishing menacingly behind it, gradually slowed to a gentle wag. Its 6 red eyes, which should have been scanning for additional threats, remained focused entirely on Hana. The creature's massive head tilted slightly to one side, giving it an almost puppy-like appearance. By the time the evacuation team finally reached the town square, they discovered a scene that would be talked about for generations. Hana was sitting cross-legged on the ground, apparently trying to teach the galaxy's most feared weapon how to sit properly. And incredibly, impossibly, the beast was actually trying to follow her instructions. "Sit," Hana commanded in her most serious 8-year-old voice, pointing at the ground. "Come on, you can do it, sit." The creature lowered its massive haunches until it was sitting like an enormous, terrifying dog. Its tail continued wagging, now making small craters in the ground behind it. The beast looked up at Hannah with what could only be described as hopeful expectation, waiting for her next command. The evacuation team leader, a tough ex-military man named Sergeant Torres, approached cautiously with his weapon drawn. But as he got closer, he too seemed to fall under the spell of the bizarre scene. Is it actually obeying her?" he whispered to Minji, who was still taking pictures. "I think so," Minji replied, her scientific mind finally kicking back into gear. "This is fascinating from a behavioral perspective. The creature appears to be exhibiting pack-bonding behaviors. It may have been programmed for dominance displays, but Hannah's complete lack of fear seems to have triggered different responses entirely." As if to prove her point, Hannah reached up and began scratching, behind what might have been the creature's ears. The beast's eyes slowly closed, and a deep rumbling sound emerged from its chest, not a threatening growl, but something that sounded remarkably like purring. "Good boy," Hannah cooed, and the rumbling grew louder. Mayor Seojin had been running New Haven for 15 years, and in that time he had dealt with everything from asteroid storms to equipment failures to food shortages. He had handled diplomatic crises with neighboring colonies, resolved disputes between families, and somehow managed to keep their small settlement running smoothly, despite being on the edge of known space. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was witnessing in the town square. The galaxy's most feared weapon of mass destruction was playing fetch. Seojin rubbed his eyes, wondering if the stress of the alien invasion had finally caused him to have a complete mental breakdown. But no. When he looked again, the scene was still there. The massive creature that had crashed into their town just an hour ago was now running around the square, chasing a tennis ball that someone had thrown. Its 12-foot frame moved with surprising grace as it bounded after the small yellow object, and when it caught the ball in its massive jaws, it came trotting back to drop it at the feet of whoever had thrown it. Even more surreal was the fact that the colony's golden retriever, a friendly dog named Biscuit, was running alongside the alien monster as if they were old friends. The two animals, if you could call the beast an animal, seemed to have worked out some kind of game where they would race each other to get the ball first. The beast was clearly holding back, allowing Biscuit to win about half the time. "This can't be happening," Seojin muttered to himself, adjusting his glasses and taking another look. But the scene remained exactly the same. Around the square, more and more colonists were gathering. Word had spread quickly through the evacuation centers that something strange was happening in town, and despite the official orders to stay in the safety zones, people were sneaking back to see for themselves. What they found defied all logic and reason. The beast was now wearing what appeared to be a collar made from emergency rope that someone had fashioned. The makeshift collar was bright orange and had a name tag that someone had quickly written "Buddy" on with a permanent marker. The creature seemed proud of its new accessory, holding its massive head high as it trotted around the square. But perhaps the most disturbing sight of all was the beast's tail. The serpentine appendage that was supposed to be dripping with deadly venom was now wagging enthusiastically, creating small dust clouds every time it hit the ground. The creature's 6 red eyes, which should have been scanning for targets to destroy, were instead focused entirely on the humans around it, watching their every move with what could only be described as eager anticipation. "Everyone stay calm," Seojin announced, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince him, the colonists or himself. "Let's not do anything to, upset our new friend here." The crowd that had gathered was a mix of fascinated and terrified. Some people were keeping their distance, still not quite believing that this monster wasn't going to suddenly remember its purpose and start attacking. Others, particularly the children, seemed completely enchanted by the creature and were already asking their parents if they could pet it. Dr. Minji Kim was standing near the center of the action, holding some kind of scanning device and taking readings of the creature. Her daughter Hana was still right next to the beast, apparently teaching it new tricks. As Seojin watched, the little girl held up her hand in a stop gesture, and the massive creature immediately froze in place. Dr. Kim, Seojin called out, trying to keep his voice steady and authoritative despite the completely insane situation. What exactly are we dealing with here? Please tell me you have some kind of scientific explanation for this. Minji looked up from her scanner, her face showing a mixture of excitement and confusion. Based on the behavioral patterns I'm observing, I believe we're seeing a pack hunter species with highly developed social hierarchies. The aggressive displays we saw initially were likely dominance testing. The creature was waiting for an appropriate alpha response from our group. Seojin stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she had just said. Doc, I need you to explain that in plain English. Pretend I'm 5 years old and tell me what's happening here. Minji pointed at the beast, which was now sitting patiently, while Hana scratched behind what might have been its ears. It thinks we're its new pack, she said simply. Hana established herself as the alpha by showing no fear and providing positive reinforcement. The creature has now bonded to our social group and considers us family. Family? Seojin repeated, watching as the beast gently nuzzled Hana with its massive head. You're telling me this thing thinks we're all related? Not related exactly, but part of its social unit. Pack animals have strong protective instincts toward their group members. In the wild, they would hunt together, defend territory together, and care for each other's young. As if to prove her point, the beast suddenly lifted its massive head and let out a long, mournful howl. The sound was completely different from the terrifying roar they had heard earlier. This was clearly some kind of communication call. What's it doing now? Seojin asked nervously. But before Minji could answer, the beast suddenly stood up and began running toward the edge of town. Its powerful legs carried it across the square in seconds, and it positioned itself at the town's perimeter, facing outward toward the open landscape beyond. The colonists followed at a safe distance, confused by the creature's sudden change in behavior. But as they reached the edge of the settlement, they could see what had caught the beast's attention. 3 more objects were streaking across the sky, clearly more drop pods from the alien fleet above. They were heading directly for New Haven, just like the first one had been. Oh no, Seojin whispered, more of them. But Hana's reaction was completely different. The little girl clapped her hands together with pure delight and shouted, "More puppies, yay!" The beast's response was immediate and dramatic. Its entire posture changed as it watched the incoming pods. The playful, friendly creature that had been entertaining the colonists suddenly transformed into something far more serious. Its 6 eyes blazed with an intensity that made everyone take a step back. Its claws extended fully, scraping against the ground as it crouched into a defensive position. But the most striking change was in the creature's expression. Where before it had looked confused and almost helpless, now its face showed pure, protective fury. This wasn't the look of a monster preparing to attack innocent people. This was the look of a guardian preparing to defend its family. The beast positioned itself directly between the colonists and the incoming drop pods, its massive frame blocking their path to the town. Its tail lashed back and forth, no longer wagging playfully but moving with deadly precision. A low growl rumbled from its throat, and this time there was nothing confused or friendly about it. "It's protecting us," Minji whispered in amazement. "The creature is actually preparing to fight against its own kind to protect us." The 3 new drop pods crashed into the landscape beyond the town, sending up massive clouds of dust and debris. Through the settling dust, the colonists could see 3 more creatures emerging, identical to their new friend, but clearly still in their original hostile programming. The beast let out another howl, but this one was different. It was a challenge, a warning to the newcomers to stay away from its adopted pack. The sound echoed across the landscape, and in the distance the 3 new creatures turned their attention toward the town, their red eyes glowing with malevolent intent. But they would have to go through their former packmate first, and it was clear that the beast had no intention of letting that happen. The air in the town square shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement, and suddenly Commander Vextal appeared out of nowhere. His teleportation technology created a brief flash of blue light before his massive form solidified in the middle of New Haven's central plaza. He stood nearly 10 feet tall, his forearms ending in clawed hands that could crush steel, and his yellow eyes burned with the fury of someone whose perfect plan had gone completely wrong. Behind him, 6 of his elite guard materialized in similar flashes of light. These were the Dominion's finest warriors, each one a veteran of dozens of planetary conquests. Their advanced armor gleamed in the afternoon sun, and their weapons hummed with barely contained energy. They had come expecting to find a town full of terrorized humans begging for mercy. Instead, they found something that made their alien minds struggle to process what they were seeing. Commander Vextal's mandibles clicked together in confusion as he looked around the square. Where he expected to see destruction and panic, he found what could only be described as the most bizarre petting zoo in galactic history. All 4 of his beasts, the most feared weapons in the Dominion arsenal, were scattered around the area, and every single one of them was surrounded by humans. But these humans weren't cowering in terror or running for their lives. They were grooming the creatures. The first beast, the one that had landed hours ago, was lying on its side while a group of human children brushed its thick hide with what appeared to be oversized dog brushes. The creature's 6 eyes were half closed in, contentment, and it was making a deep rumbling sound that Vextal had never heard before. Its tail wagged lazily, creating small dust clouds with each movement. The second beast was being examined by a group of adults who had set up what looked like a medical station. They had bandages, antiseptic, and various tools spread out on folding tables. One of the humans was carefully cleaning a small scratch on the creature's front leg, while another was checking its teeth like a veterinarian examining a patient. The beast sat perfectly still, apparently enjoying the attention. Most shocking of all, the third and fourth beasts were lying on their backs while human children rubbed their bellies. Their massive legs were sticking up in the air, and their tongues were hanging out of their mouths. If Vextal didn't know better, he would have sworn they were smiling. "What sorcery is this?" Vextal hissed, his voice carrying across the square and causing several humans to look up from their activities. "What magic have you used to corrupt my warriors?" Dr. Minji. Kim stepped forward from the crowd, still holding her scanning device. She showed no fear as she approached the alien commander, despite the fact that he towered over her and was surrounded by heavily armed soldiers. Her calm demeanor seemed to puzzle Vextal even more than the sight of his domesticated weapons. "No, sorcery, Commander," Minji said with a slight smile. "Just a fundamental misunderstanding about human psychology. Your beasts triggered what we call the baby schema response in our species." "The what?" Vextal demanded, his translator struggling with the unfamiliar term. "Large eyes, proportionally big heads, playful behavior patterns," Minji explained patiently, as if she was giving a lecture to students. "These are all traits that humans are biologically programmed to find appealing. You essentially created the perfect human companion animal." Vextal's forearms gestured wildly at his beasts. "Impossible! These are apex predators, killing machines." Dread for maximum psychological impact. They have conquered 47 worlds. Entire civilizations have surrendered at the mere sight of them. "Oh, they're absolutely lethal," Minji agreed cheerfully, seemingly unbothered by the commander's growing agitation. "Look at those claws, that bite force, their coordination abilities. They're incredible predators. But here's the thing about humans, Commander. We have a very long history of befriending dangerous animals." She gestured toward one of the beasts, which was now playing a gentle game of tug-of-war with 3 human children. Despite its enormous strength, the creature was clearly being careful not to hurt them. "We domesticated wolves into dogs over thousands of years," Minji continued. "We've trained bears to dance, taught lions to perform in circuses, and kept tigers as pets. Humans are the species that looked at massive predatory cats and decided to worship them as gods. We saw giant wolves and thought, I want to pet that. Your beasts are basically pre-domesticated. They have all the traits we find irresistible." Vextal stared at her in disbelief. His elite guard shifted nervously behind him, clearly as confused as their commander. This was not how planetary conquests were supposed to go, but the fear response, Vextal protested weakly. The psychological warfare protocols, the terror that breaks enemy morale. Fear and love often trigger very similar biological responses. In humans, Minji explained, elevated heart rate, intense focus, protective instincts, emotional bonding. You bred creatures that demand a strong emotional response from humans. You just assumed it would be negative. Before Vextal could respond, he felt something tugging on his armored leg. He looked down to see Hannah, still wearing her pink backpack, pulling on his battle gear with her small hands. The 8-year-old girl showed absolutely no fear of the towering alien warrior or his weapon-carrying guards. "Mister, are these your pets?" Hannah asked with the innocent curiosity that only children possess. "They're really, really good boys. Do you want to see them do tricks? I taught the big one to roll over, and the spotted one can play dead." Vextal stared down at the small human child, his mind reeling. This tiny creature, who should have been paralyzed with terror in his presence, was treating him like a friendly neighbor who had brought his dogs to the park. They are not pets," he managed to say, his voice much quieter than before. "They are weapons of war." "Well, they're very good at playing fetch for weapons," Hannah said seriously, "and they give the best hugs. Do you want to see?" Before Vextal could stop her, Hannah had run over to the nearest beast and thrown her arms around its massive neck. The creature, which had been engineered to strike fear into the hearts of entire civilizations, gently nuzzled the little girl and made soft, cooing sounds. But what happened next completely shattered Vextal's understanding of reality. At some signal he couldn't perceive, all 4 beasts stood up and moved into a perfect line. Each creature balanced a colorful ball on its nose, toys that the humans had apparently given them. Their tails wagged in perfect synchronization, creating a rhythmic drumbeat against the ground. "Sit," Hannah commanded, and all 4 beasts immediately sat down, still balancing their balls. "Stay," she said, and they remained perfectly motionless. "Good boys," she cheered, and they all began wagging their tails again, their eyes bright with happiness and pride. Vextal's legs felt weak. He slumped against his transport pod, staring at his most feared weapons as they performed party tricks for a human child. His elite guard looked equally stunned, their weapons hanging uselessly at their sides. "This cannot be possible," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "This simply cannot be possible." But as he watched Hannah teaching his galactic terrors to shake hands with their massive claws, Vextal began to realize that everything he thought he knew about psychological warfare had just been turned completely upside down. The air in the town square shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement, and suddenly Commander Vextal appeared out of nowhere. His teleportation technology created a brief flash of blue light before his massive form solidified in the middle of New Haven's central plaza. He stood nearly 10 feet tall, his 4 arms ending in clawed hands that could crush steel, and his yellow eyes burned with the fury of someone whose perfect plan had gone completely wrong. Behind him, 6 of his elite guard materialized in similar flashes of light. These were the Dominion's finest warriors, each one a veteran of dozens of planetary conquests. Their advanced armor gleamed in the afternoon sun, and their weapons hummed with barely contained energy. They had come expecting to find a town full of terrorized humans begging for mercy. Instead, they found something that made their alien minds struggle to process what they were seeing. Commander Vextal's mandibles clicked together in confusion as he looked around the square. Where he expected to see destruction and panic, he found what could only be described as the most bizarre petting zoo in galactic history. All 4 of his beasts, the most feared weapons in the Dominion arsenal, were scattered around the area, and every single one of them was surrounded by humans. But these humans weren't cowering in terror or running for their lives. They were grooming the creatures. The first beast, the one that had landed hours ago, was lying on its side while a group of human children brushed its thick hide with what appeared to be oversized dog brushes. The creature's 6 eyes were half closed in contentment, and it was making a deep rumbling sound that Vextal had never heard before. Its tail wagged lazily, creating small dust clouds with each movement. The second beast was being examined by a group of adults who had set up what looked like a medical station. They had bandages, antiseptic, and various tools spread out on folding tables. One of the humans was carefully cleaning a small scratch on the creature's front leg, while another was checking its teeth like a veterinarian examining a patient. The beast sat perfectly still, apparently enjoying the attention. Most shocking of all, the third and fourth beasts were lying on their backs while human children rubbed their bellies. Their massive legs were sticking up in the air, and their tongues were hanging out of their mouths. If Vextal didn't know, better he would have sworn they were smiling. "What sorcery is this?" Vextal hissed, his voice carrying across the square and causing several humans to look up from their activities. "What magic have you used to corrupt my warriors?" "Dr. Minji." Kim stepped forward from the crowd, still holding her scanning device. She showed no fear as she approached the alien commander, despite the fact that he towered over her and was surrounded by heavily armed soldiers. Her calm demeanor seemed to puzzle Vextal even more than the sight of his domesticated weapons. "No. Sorcery, Commander," Minji said with a slight smile. "Just a fundamental misunderstanding about human psychology. Your beasts triggered what we call the baby schema response in our species." "The what?" Vextal demanded, his translator struggling with the unfamiliar term. "Large eyes, proportionally big heads, playful behavior patterns," Minji explained patiently, as if she was giving a lecture to students. "These are all traits that humans are biologically programmed to find appealing. You essentially created the perfect human companion animal." Vextal's four arms gestured wildly at his beasts. "Impossible! These are apex predators, killing machines." Bred for maximum psychological impact, they have conquered 47 worlds. Entire civilizations have surrendered at the mere sight of them. "Oh, they're absolutely lethal," Minji agreed cheerfully, seemingly unbothered by the commander's growing agitation. "Look at those claws, that bite force, their coordination abilities. They're incredible predators. But here's the thing about humans, Commander. We have a very long history of befriending dangerous animals." She gestured toward one of the beasts, which was now playing a gentle game of tug-of-war with 3 human children. Despite its enormous strength, the creature was clearly being careful not to hurt them. "We domesticated wolves into dogs over thousands of years," Minji continued. "We've trained bears to dance, taught lions to perform in circuses, and kept tigers as pets. Humans are the species that looked at massive predatory cats and decided to worship them as gods. We saw giant wolves and thought, I want to pet that. Your beasts are basically pre-domesticated. They have all the traits we find irresistible." Vextal stared at her in disbelief. His elite guard shifted nervously behind him, clearly as confused as their commander. This was not how planetary conquests were supposed to go. "But the fear response," Vextal protested weakly. "The psychological warfare protocols, the terror that breaks enemy morale." "Fear and love often trigger very similar biological responses. In humans," Minji explained. "Elevated heart rate, intense focus, protective instincts, emotional bonding. You bred creatures that demand a strong emotional response from humans. You just assumed it would be negative." Before Vextal could respond, he felt something tugging on his armored leg. He looked down to see Hana, still wearing her pink backpack, pulling on his battle gear with her small hands. The 8-year-old girl showed absolutely no fear of the towering alien warrior or his weapon-carrying guards. "Mister, are these your pets?" Hana asked with the innocent curiosity that only children possess. "They're really, really good boys. Do you want to see them do tricks?" Hai taught the big one to roll over, and the spotted one can play dead. Vextal stared down at the small human child, his mind reeling. This tiny creature, who should have been paralyzed with terror in his presence, was treating him like a friendly neighbor who had brought his dogs to the park. They are not pets," he managed to say, his voice much quieter than before. "They are weapons of war." "Well, they're very good at playing fetch for weapons," Hana said seriously, "and they give the best hugs. Do you want to see?" Before Vextal could stop her, Hana had run over to the nearest beast and thrown her arms around its massive neck. The creature, which had been engineered to strike fear into the hearts of entire civilizations, gently nuzzled the little girl and made soft, cooing sounds. But what happened next completely shattered Vextal's understanding of reality. At some signal he couldn't perceive, all 4 beasts stood up and moved into a perfect line. Each creature balanced a colorful ball on its nose, toys that the humans had apparently given them. Their tails wagged in perfect synchronization, creating a rhythmic drumbeat against the ground. "Sit," Hana commanded, and all 4 beasts immediately sat down, still balancing their balls. "Stay," she said, and they remained perfectly motionless. "Good boys," she cheered, and they all began wagging their tails again, their eyes bright with happiness and pride. Vextal's legs felt weak. He slumped against his transport pod, staring at his most feared weapons as they performed party tricks for a human child. His elite guard looked equally stunned, their weapons hanging uselessly at their sides. "This cannot be possible," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "This simply cannot be possible." But as he watched Hana teaching his galactic terrors to shake hands with their massive claws, Vextal began to realize that everything he thought he knew about psychological warfare had just been turned completely upside down. The morning sun cast long shadows across New Haven's Central Park as Commander Vextal adjusted his position on the surprisingly comfortable human bench. 6 months ago, he would never have imagined sitting peacefully in the heart of what was supposed to be a conquered human settlement. Yet here he was, watching the most surreal scene of his military career unfold before his eyes. His former weapons of terror were engaged in what humans called tag with a group of local children. The sight was both magnificent and deeply confusing to his alien sensibilities. These massive creatures, each standing nearly 8 feet tall when on their hind legs, were carefully moderating their strength and speed to match that of small humans, who barely reached their shoulders. The beast designated as Beta 7 was currently it in the game. The creature moved with deliberate slowness, giving the children plenty of time to scatter and hide behind trees and playground equipment. When it finally caught up to a young boy who had tripped over his own feet, the beast simply tapped him gently with one enormous paw and then bounded away, its tail wagging with what could only be described as pure joy. "Buster's getting better at the game," called out 10-year-old Hannah from across the playground. She was the unofficial leader of the children's pack, a role she'd naturally assumed when the beasts first arrived. "He used to be too gentle. Now he's learned that kids like to be chased a little bit." Vextal still couldn't get used to hearing his bioengineered apex predators referred to by names like Buster, Coco, and Princess Fluffytail. The last name belonged to the creature that had once been designated Alpha Prime, a being specifically designed to instill primal fear in any species that encountered it. Now it wore a pink collar that read Princess and had learned to sit prettily for treats. The peace treaty negotiations had been unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. While human officials and alien representatives worked out the details of surrender, cessation of hostilities, and territorial agreements, the beasts had served as unofficial assistants to the maintenance crews working on both human and alien technology. "Wrench," a technician would call out, and Beta 3 would trot over with the correct tool in its mouth. "Phillips head screwdriver," and Gamma 1 would carefully place the requested item in the human's outstretched hand. The beasts seemed to have an intuitive understanding of which tool was needed for which job, and they took obvious pride in being helpful. The sight of beings designed for conquest fetching tools and wagging their tails had done more to ease diplomatic tensions than hours of formal negotiations ever could have. "I still don't understand how you did it," Vextal admitted to Dr. Minji, who had become something of a celebrity in both human and alien circles for her behavioral analysis of the beasts. She sat beside him on the bench, tablet in hand, documenting every interaction between human and creature with the dedication of someone recording historic events. Dr. Minji looked up from her notes and smiled. It was the same patient smile she'd given him dozens of times over the past 6 months, whenever he asked this question. She seemed to understand that his confusion wasn't really about the science, but about something deeper that challenged everything. He thought he knew about conquest and control. "Fear and love often trigger the same responses in humans," she explained, scratching behind the ears of the alpha beast who had wandered over to check on them. The creature, now universally known as Buster thanks to Hana's naming rights, settled down beside the bench with a contented rumble that vibrated through the ground. "Elevated heart rate, focused attention, protective instincts," Dr. Minji continued, her fingers working through the thick fur behind Buster's ears. The creature's eyes half closed in bliss, and its massive tail thumped against the grass. "You bred creatures that demanded emotional response from humans. You just assumed that response would be negative." Vextal watched as another group of children approached Coco, the beast that had once been Beta 2. They moved with the confident fearlessness that only human children seem to possess. Where adult members of other species had fled in terror, these small humans saw opportunity for friendship. But the other species we tested them on, Vextal protested, though his argument felt weaker each time he made it. The Zephyrians, the Crystalline Collective, the Void Dancers, they all responded exactly as predicted. Complete terror, social breakdown, surrender within days. Ran away. Dr. Minji finished for him, a note of amusement in her voice. Every single one of them took one look at your beasts and decided the best course of action was to put as much distance as possible between themselves and what they perceived as unstoppable predators. She gestured toward the playground where Princess Fluffytail was carefully allowing a group of toddlers to climb on her back. The former Alpha Prime, designed to be the pinnacle of terrifying biological weaponry, was now serving as a living jungle gym for humans who weren't even tall enough to see over her shoulder when standing. Humans are weird, Commander, Dr. Minji continued. We saw giant wolves with advanced intelligence and thought, I want to pet that. You created the perfect human companion and wondered why we weren't afraid. The truth of her words was evident everywhere Vextal looked. Across the park, teenagers were teaching the beasts to play frisbee, with limited success but unlimited enthusiasm. The creature's coordination was perfect for complex military maneuvers, but seemed to struggle with the physics of spinning discs. Every missed catch resulted in frustrated huffs from the beasts and encouraging cheers from the humans. Near the pond, an elderly human woman sat reading while one of the smaller beasts napped in the shade beside her chair. The woman occasionally reached down to pat the creature's flank, and the beast would stir just enough to acknowledge the attention before settling back into sleep. The bureaucrats back at Dominion headquarters are having interesting discussions, Vextal mentioned, watching as Hana demonstrated a new trick she'd been teaching Buster. The council wants to commission more beasts. They think if we make them bigger, more obviously predatory, maybe add some additional threatening features. Dr. Minji's laughter interrupted him. It was a sound he'd grown fond of over the past months, genuine and warm in a way that his species rarely experienced. They'll just be more lovable, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. Commander, you've accidentally weaponized cuteness. Half the galaxy now wants to immigrate to human space just to meet the beasts. She wasn't exaggerating. The immigration requests had started arriving within weeks of the first news reports about the failed invasion. Species from across known space were submitting applications to visit human colonies, specifically requesting cultural exchange opportunities with the four-legged companions. The Galactic Tourism Board had already designated New Haven as a must-see destination for interspecies travelers. The economic implications were staggering. Humans had gone from being a relatively minor species on the galactic stage to the center of what economists were calling the companion creature boom. Other species were offering unprecedented trade agreements for the chance to establish beast breeding programs in their own territories. Hana's been giving me updates on the training progress, Dr. Minji continued, nodding toward the little girl who was now attempting to teach Buster something called rollover. The massive creature was gamely trying to comply, though his size made the maneuver more like a controlled earthquake than a graceful trick. She says Buster's the smartest, but Coco's the best at sensing when someone's sad, Dr. Minji reported. Princess Fluffytail apparently gives the best hugs, though I'm not sure how she figured that out safely. And the pack as a whole has developed their own version of human games. They've invented something they call gentle pounce, where they pretend to hunt the children, but make sure to land softly and give lots of face licks instead of using teeth. Vextal shook his head in wonder. The behavioral adaptations were remarkable from a scientific standpoint, but from a military perspective, they represented the complete failure of every principle his species had built their expansion strategy around. Look what Buster learned. Hana's excited voice cut through his thoughts as she ran toward them with the alpha beast trotting beside her. Her face was flushed with excitement, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of joy that seemed to be perpetually present in human children. She held up her small hand, palm facing outward. Buster, high five! The former terror of the galaxy, the creature designed to break the will of entire civilizations, carefully lifted one massive paw and gently touched it to Hana's palm. The size difference was comical. Her entire hand could have fit on just one of his claws. But the beast modulated his movement with precision that spoke to incredible intelligence and even more incredible gentleness. "Good boy," Hana cooed. And the beast's response was immediate and dramatic. A deep rumbling purr started in his chest and spread throughout his entire body. The sound was so low and powerful that Vextal could feel it in his bones, and the vibration caused small ripples to appear in a nearby puddle. For a moment, Vextal was transported back to the design labs where the beasts had been created. He remembered the excitement of the research teams as they fine-tuned the creatures' vocalizations. They had worked so hard to create sounds that would trigger primal fear responses across multiple species. The irony that those same sounds now represented contentment and happiness to humans was not lost. "John him. The pack dynamics have stabilized beautifully," Dr. Minji observed, making notes on her tablet. "Buster maintains his alpha status, but it's become more about guidance and protection than dominance. The others look to him for social cues, about how to interact with humans, and he's become remarkably good at reading human emotions and responding appropriately." As if summoned by their conversation, the rest of the pack began gathering around them. They moved with the same coordinated precision they'd been designed for, but now it served a completely different purpose. Instead of surrounding prey, they were forming a protective circle around their adopted human family. Coco settled down next to a group of children who were drawing with chalk on the walkway. Princess Fluffytail positioned herself where she could keep an eye on the toddlers while still being available for pets from passing adults. The other beasts spread out across the immediate area, each finding a spot where they could be helpful or comforting to nearby humans. "The Dominion's days of conquest are definitely over," Vextal mused, watching as one of his former weapons of war carefully retrieved a child's dropped ice cream cone and returned it with only minimal drool damage. "But I'm starting to think our future as the galaxy's most beloved pet breeders might actually be more profitable." The truth was becoming increasingly clear with each passing day. The economic benefits of the companion creature trade were already exceeding the projected gains from conquering human space. More importantly, the cultural exchange was enriching both species in ways that conquest never could have achieved. Alien visitors to New Haven consistently reported that spending time with humans and their beast companions left them feeling more optimistic about the future of interspecies relations. Humans, meanwhile, were learning about dozens of different alien cultures through the steady stream of visitors who came to meet the beasts. In the distance, as the afternoon began to wind down toward dinner time, Buster's pack began their evening song. It started with Buster himself, a long, melodious howl that carried across the entire settlement. One by one, the other beasts joined in, their voices blending in harmonies that spoke of contentment, belonging, and family. 6 months ago, that sound had struck terror into the hearts of beings across 17 different solar systems. Now it simply meant dinner time to the humans of New Haven, and it meant something even more precious, the sound of a pack that had found its true purpose not in conquest, but in companionship. As the howling reached its crescendo, Hana threw her arms around Buster's neck and added her own voice to the song. Other children joined in, then adults, and finally even some of the alien observers who had come to study this unprecedented interspecies bonding. The failed invasion had become something nobody could have predicted, a new chapter in Galactic history where the greatest victory came not through force, but through the simple power of love, acceptance, and the universal desire for companionship that transcended species boundaries. And as the sun set over New Haven, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Commander Vextal realized that sometimes the greatest defeats lead to the most unexpected victories.